Welcome to the show. My name is Rabbi Daniel Schonbuch, your host today. We have with us once again Rabbi Simcha Weinstein, the Rabbi of Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York. Rabbi, welcome to the show again.
It's great to be here.
Yeah. You know, you've written many books on different topics in Judaism. You wrote one book called The Case for Children, about the importance of having children. Tell us about the book.
I wrote that book because I read a cover story in the New York Times called No Babies. And the premise of the cover story was that never before has birth rates fallen so far, so fast, and in so many places. Perhaps the most endangered species on Earth is no longer the polar bear or the panda, but people. And I found this article horrifying, and millennials don't seem to have the same birth rates as previous generations. And it was something that really inspired me and motivated me to write the book.
It's such a big issue today. People are talking about their own lives, but it's harder for them to talk about helping other lives grow. Is that part of the trends that you're seeing as well? Self-centeredness as opposed to having more children?
I think people are staying in, some of the reasons are justifiable, and I think very logical. People are staying in school later and longer. If you want to make a partner, you really have to get that master's degree and get that PhD, and things get pushed off. Students are graduating with more debt than ever before, and I think women today have just as much debt as the men, and I think we're all pushed to enter that rat race, and even if you win, you're still a rat, and I think things just get sort of pushed off. It becomes an afterthought, and it's, I think, more difficult to settle down. The older one gets, we become fixed, we become very connected to our own system and our own sort of creature comforts, and who has time to push a stroller when you're busy soul cycling on your own stroller?
Yeah. So despite that rat race going on today, you believe people should still consider having more children. Why?
I think children give you meaning. I don't necessarily think children make you more happy. In fact, there are studies that show children make you less happier. But I would argue that there's a difference between instant gratification and a long-term richness and happiness. You know, when you go to Duane Reade or Rite Aid, a pharmacy, you know, as one checks out, they sell, I think, cigarettes, Hershey bars, and the National Enquirer and People magazine. If you go in the back, that's where you'll find the antibiotics. I think it's easier to chase instant gratification as opposed to something more longer, something more richer. You know, my iPhone has an incredible array of apps, but I don't think even Apple has been able to design an app that can replicate the feeling I have when I hold my children in my hand, when we play in the park.
So in your book, what do you talk about in terms of encouraging people to have children? What advice do you give them?
So I deal very practical. I deal with the cost of children. I don't think children are as expensive. I deal with one of the biggest arguments against children, believe it or not, is actually an environmental argument. People talk about, Rabbi, why do you want to bring another little polluter into the world? Isn't the ozone layer depleted enough? However, I would argue that big families actually leave a much smaller carbon footprint. Actually, it's the same pot of pasta being boiled for my 6 in my family as perhaps a single person. We're all listening to the same radio. We're all sitting in the same car. So I think actually from an environmental perspective, children actually have many benefits. I also believe from a financial perspective, people say that perhaps we can't afford to have children. I would say society as a whole can't afford not to have children. I'll give you a practical example from a macro perspective, that Social Security is predicated on more people paying in than paying out. Right now, that's changing. The metrics are changing, and we need an ever-growing workforce. You know, people say that 50 is the new 40, and this can't go on forever. Europe is imploding. In fact, it's shrinking. And I think that without a next generation of consumers and workers, I think it's going to be very tough to sustain a global economy.
Mm-hmm. Well, that message seems to work for many women, let's say, that inherently would like to have more children. What do you say to the men that may find it a little harder to have children?
Yeah, I think today's men are a little self-obsessed. They spend several billion hours a year playing video games. You know, the last time I sat here, we spoke about my book on superheroes. I've been to comic book conventions, and I've seen grown men having lightsaber wars in the lobby of hotels. I call today's man man-child. You know, the frat house culture seems to have extended past college age. I know Manhattan has bars that advertise spring break 62 weeks of the year. However, I would argue, after having children, and I'll give you one example, I don't do homework with my kids because it's good for my kids. I actually do homework with my kids because it's good for me. It teaches me to be selfless. It teaches me service. It gives me meaning. It gives me joy. It gives me happiness. And really, it gives me absolute transcendence.
So we can actually grow more with our children. In other words, they don't take away from us. Children add to our lives in many different ways.
I think they add tremendously. I think that being able to see the world through their eyes is exciting, is motivating. It gives me tremendous meaning. You know, as a Brit from England, I have a love of soccer, and it's something that I've actually kind of passed down to my boys in my family. And it's something to see it through their eyes is very beautiful. And certainly to live the Jewish life, I think is very intrinsically connected to family, to rites of passage. My son recently celebrated a bar mitzvah, and to watch him make that transition from boy to man was something that will stay with me forever.
Did you come from a big family or a small family?
I have one sibling, so a small family.
And Blianhar, you have a larger family right now. What's that like, coming from a smaller family, confronting a larger family?
It's challenging, but I do believe as you have more children, division of scale kicks in, where the older ones start to pitch in with the younger ones. So really, I have 4, but I would say it's more like 3.5, because the older ones start to help occasionally.
So what happens at your Shabbos table with your kids? What type of enjoyment do you experience that you wouldn't experience alone?
So my Shabbos table, I think, is very unique because being on a college campus, so my children are exposed to many different viewpoints, political, cultural, and I think they've been able to elevate the Shabbos table. And I think that students themselves don't always get to be around the family. In fact, one of the things that I think a college campus lacks is children. And when I walk around the campus with my kids, I see the excitement in the students.
People are excited to see your children.
It's almost like I'm walking with an endangered species. I don't think they've seen a child before. Right. I see the professors running out and they're screaming, Rabbi, the baby, the baby. And I realize they've probably never seen a baby.
And they probably wish they had a baby on some level, right?
And also I found that academia is very anti-family. I think they see children as a limitation. I think there's a pressure on women not to have children within academia. And I think, unfortunately, that they're really missing out on something very beautiful.
That you're experiencing now with your own family, and you share that at every Shabbat table with your community.
Right. And I think that the children actually are one of the most powerful tools in my rabbinical arsenal. I know that when they see children davening and making blessings, I think coming from the rabbi, you know, I'm looked at as a bit of an authority figure. When they see children intrinsically singing and davening and having a joy and a love of Judaism, I think it's very infectious for my students.
So there's some people out there that may not consider having children. They may be concerned about the finances. They may be concerned that they lose their independence. What would be your final message tonight to those people kind of sitting on and not knowing what to do? What would you say to them? I
think that to not have children, I think you're missing out on one of life's greatest gifts. As they say, if I knew how much fun grandchildren was, I would have had them much earlier, I think the joke is. And I think that one would like to leave a legacy when you look back on the totality of your life, to know that there is a legacy, there is a continuation. You know, there's a famous story told in the Talmud. There is seeds being planted by an elderly man. He's planting these seeds and he's accosted and asked, you know, you're an old man, you're not going to see the fruits of these trees. And he says, I may not see them, but my children and my grandchildren will see them. And to leave a legacy, I think, is to leave a life. It's very powerful.
Well, thank you so much tonight for being our guest and giving such an incredible message to our audience. If people want to read about your book, The Case for Children, how do they get the book?
Under my bed, I have many copies. The trunk of my car. any good bookstore. The book is on Amazon, my website, rabbisimcha.com. And I would love people to read it and really take part in the dialogue and the journey.
You're a wonderful guest tonight. Would you come back another time in the future?
I'm happy to come back next week.
Thanks so much for coming. Well, that wraps up another show of Family Matters. My name is Rabbi Daniel Schonbuch. See you next week on our new segment.